I want to thank all of you for being here at our very first mWISE. And for this conference, I wanted to prove my marketing skills. So I sat with Vikram, our CMO. I sat with Sandra Toms, and they said, you know what, I'm going to name this thing, because I named Mandiant, so I'm good at this. So I came up with Mandiant. Sometimes you prepare intense defense. And Sandra Toms said, M stupid is not going to cut it. So welcome to mWISE. The first thing I want to be able to tell you is that we are all special. And you'll be like, really? Yes, absolutely. You know, I've been doing cybersecurity for about 25, almost 30 years. Bad at math, so I have to give you a range. And during that time frame, I've recognized you do more than build software. You're on the front lines where, whether, bottom line, if planes came at a nation, the nation itself would respond. If there is a land war, the nation shows up and they fight. If you're on sea, you're going to have ships, sailors, you're going to fight it out. But then in the cyber domain, where you see the early intentions of every nation, it's us, the folks in this room, combined with the government, who's also in this room, defending a domain that is new to all of us and emerging and becoming more and more impactful all the time. I want to begin by thanking the men and women of Mandiant, because I think the best job in cybersecurity. I can show up every day and talk to Barbara and get the latest HR issue, or I can talk to Sandra and say, hey, what's going on in the world? So sorry, Barbara, I call Sandra slightly more. I can talk to Charles Carmichael and learn what's going on the front lines, or Robert Wallace, tell me something cool. And it's amazing how impactful the stories that we're going to tell you over the next 3 days are. So I want to thank the men and women of Mandiant that allow me to represent you in this capacity. I want to thank the folks that are practicing this profession, because we are all here at this conference for the next 3 days to get better at it, to meet people that can up our game, to learn about technologies that can up our game, to just get better at what we do, because we should never rest and maintain constant vigilance. So I've thanked all of you, and I just want to remind you that my clicker is not changing the slide. I set it up perfectly, nailed it, and there we go. That the cyber domain is protected by all of us. So I'm going to try my left thumb now. It might be a little better. So I remember in 1995 responding to my first ever computer intrusion. Probably did an interesting job at that. I remember monitoring the network out at Philips Lab in Albuquerque. And I ran TCP dump to tap the network. Tap sounds ominous, so I'll say to monitor the network. And just looking at traffic, and folks were accessing it. And I remember thinking to myself, so why am I here doing this? And right then, it started dawning on me, as we're seeing the cyber domain emerge, that wherever money goes, crime follows, period. And right now, you can monetize in the cyber domain if you go on offense. All right? Wherever information goes, espionage is going to go. And wherever there's ideological conflict or conflict itself, you're going to attack command and control. If you look at crime, espionage, and conflict, they're kind of with humanity all the time. And as long as they are, all of us are going to be on the front lines responding to those things. So reminding us of the mission that we are going to be protecting cyberspace. And what better mission is there right now, as we figured out? So today, I'm going to look back on about the last 1,000 intrusions we've responded to over the last year. We're going to take inputs from our 350 threat analysts that speak 34 languages in 26 countries. We're going to learn from our red teaming. We learned from other nations' red teaming. And we're going to talk about the conclusions that we've had over the last 15 months. And then I'm going to kind of prognosticate, if that's a word, felt fancy, on the future, going 2023 and out. So in regards to the threats, this will sound like your traditional fear, uncertainty, and doubt moment. There's just more of everything, period. More malware, more intrusions, more threat groups, more impact sometimes. So when you look at each one of these, last year we found 1,143 different threat groups. And recognize that how we do this is every time we respond to a breach, figuring out what happened, what to do about it, we're kind of doing Quincy, getting the fingerprints of each one of these intrusions, and we align it to patterns. And to put that in perspective, in 2010, when we were doing this back then with our open IOC standard that all of you use, but we had open IOC, and with great rigor and discipline, we're recording the threat evidence, and we had 40 groups. We're well over 4,000 now. And the threat actors are changing fast enough that we could be responding to threat actor A on Monday, and probably a week later, we're still responding to threat actor A at another place. But based on our rapid innovation on defense, we're changing their TTPs fast enough that they're showing up as a different group. But 1,143 new groups last year is a record. We responded to more intrusions than ever before last year, no question about it. More malware families with 733 different families. And a lot of folks will say, 733 families, that's small. It's not even a lot. Well, a couple things. We get millions of pieces of malware every day that are different, but they're all derivatives of each other. Everybody's just kind of, it's almost like the designer drug era where you're just barely changing the chemistry of things to have a legal drug. With malware, there's a lot of similarities. We look at all pieces of malware, learn if they're derivatives, and then we just track them by families. But that blew away our prior record. We're responding to intrusions where it used to be, if you're a state on offense, you only use custom tools. And it was fascinating for me to observe because every time I did forensics, you could tell that who you were responding to were trained on the custom tools. And then if they broke into a network and used publicly available tools, it looks like they're, the leading officer was like, hey, you got to figure that out on their own, because we'd see threat actors make mistakes on the public tools. Well, now we have a blend. Almost every time we respond to an intrusion, even if there's custom stuff in use, there's going to be some publicly available stuff. And that makes attribution a little harder. There's more 0 days. That's a good news, bad news story. But on the good side, that means we're getting better at defense. And by 0 day, I mean attacks with no patch to them. And they're going to work. If you have that vulnerable service and somebody runs a 0 day, it's going to work. We found 32 0 days used in the wild in 2019, 30 in 2020. And by the way, 32 is the record. We've been tracking this since like the 90s. And 32 is a record. 30 in 2020. 80 in 2021. This year to date, we're at 36. And I'll do the math for you. That means we're going to end up at 43.9 0 days this year. So it's still at a very heightened level. And that means that we have to have that defense in depth. We have to have, hey, if they're going to break in with a 0 day, we detect the second inning of the intrusion. We're dealing with a lot more handoffs. And this is actually frustrating for us. And what I mean by handoffs is when a threat actor A breaks in, they got access, threat actor B is buying that access and then doing other operations. And the reason that's complex is I remember years ago there was a stigma that if you were hacked and somebody deployed ransomware, well, then your security wasn't very good. And the pundits and the experts would say, oh, you got to do better at hygiene and all these other things. Now when we respond to ransomware attacks, we're not sure who broke in, period. We don't know who threat actor A was that got the access in the first place, but they're passing it to threat actor B, who's a ransomware actor, who may even work with threat actor C, who wrote the ransomware in the first place, and there might even be another person or another party that does and conducts the ransom. So more handoffs, more supply chain breaches, more false claims, and I'll elaborate on this one because I got to live it firsthand numerous times, and this is when I find out that Tim Carruthers does not attend. Is Tim Carruthers in the room, our CISO? I knew he wouldn't be. That's good. That means he's working and securing us and making sure we all have to log in 9 times today just to get one email. That's perfect. But I wanted to point him out because I have no idea how he does the job. Mandiant is targeted every day by threat actors in ways that make my stomach churn, and I'll call Tim and he'll be like, we're good. And I'm like, are you sure? And he's like, yeah, I'm sure. And I'm like, okay. And then I dial it down like 2 notches, and that's it. But we were at RSA this year, and the whole time I'm at RSA, I'm thinking, hey, I'm on platform at 4:30. I'm going to nail my presentation. I'm getting ready. At the exact same time that I'm on platform, I get notification from someone in the US government, hey, are things okay at Mandiant? I'm like, what's going on? When I get a text like that, I get worried. So I call Tim, hey, what's going on? He goes, yeah, somebody said they've got our data, but they don't, and they have a countdown online. And then I saw the counter, and it was unbelievable. There's literally just digits counting down, where at the end of the counter, we're going to post Mandiant data, okay, at 4:30. So it was like perfectly timed so that when I went on stage, I'm like, I wonder if my data's out on the internet right now. True story, it happened. But it was a false claim, but an impactful one, and there's too many false claims happening right now, and they can happen to your organization, and immediately false claims are assumed as true. And you have to respond to them. You have to go shields up and get everybody mobilized to figure out, is there grounds to this? And a lot of times what happens is third parties tangentially related to you are compromised. They may get one of your invoices. They may get some of your data somehow, and then they make the claim that they've compromised you. We're seeing more public disclosures, which doesn't surprise me, more companies being compromised each year. And then more government involvement, which is a good thing. It used to be rare when we showed up and the government was there and they were there to help. It's one of the only times Ronald Reagan's phrase is wrong. We're from the government, we're here to help. They really are when it comes to cyber. We've shown up and responded to intrusions where if it wasn't for intel from government agencies worldwide, we wouldn't have the speed and agility that we need to respond appropriately. So that's all bad news, right? You're like, great, Mandia got on stage and said more bad. But I actually have an optimistic conclusion to that in 3 slides. I don't want to jump straight to optimism. I want to get to, so how are attackers breaking in? And for those of you wondering, I've got an ambiguous answer for you. Because internally, we're still counting. But there's 3 ways, and I can tell you the trends. If somebody's breaking in right now, exploitation is on the rise. So breaking in via exploit is on the rise. Breaking in with valid credentials, whether it's password stuffing, meaning they're getting passwords from some third-party breaches and they're trying it out, or they just somehow knew your passphrases from prior intrusions and you're not doing password resets globally on every account. And then the third way is spear phishing. And the trend is that we're seeing spear phishing as a percentage of victim zero, meaning the first machine compromised in a breach we respond to is going down right now. It's gone down 2 years in a row, and our prediction is it's going to go down as a percentage 3rd year in a row. Exploitation, and where I get ambiguous, is I don't have a clear answer from our frontline folks. Is exploitation number 1? Or is just valid credentials number 1 right now? And I do know this, whenever you respond to an intrusion and valid credentials are in use right away, you always wonder, did I miss victim zero somehow? And a lot of times you'll read about a 0 day, 30 days or 60 days later and think, do we reopen the investigation to see evidence there? So we've learned a lot of, bad things went on in the last 15 months, but I think the overall conclusion I have is more optimistic than in prior years. And by the way, I have to click the button like 9 times. So if my timing's slightly off, I'm like, and it just happens. And then different things switch. But I do believe we're closing the security gap. And we've been talking about this security gap since Mandiant was founded. I mean, we were founded with the premise, security breaches are inevitable. That was wildly unpopular, so we changed it to, you can't solely rely on preventive measures, which was also wildly unpopular. But that way, so fine, we said fine, there will always be a security gap. Let's go with that one. Slightly less unpopular. But we kept it. And what I mean by the security gap is there's always an emergence of new and novel attacks that are out in front and ahead of our safeguards, period. That's the game we're in, folks. We're in a sparring match and we're trying to stay ahead of the new and novel. But I think if you have a network that defends against all attacks everywhere all the time today, you are probably potentially impeding business as well. So our goal has always been at Mandiant, know the new and novel, be the first to know it, and keep closing the window. And when you look at industry, we are definitely closing the window in cybersecurity, meaning from the moment there's a new emerging attack to the moment there's a patch and a whole bunch of awareness of it, that window is shortening. And to put that in perspective, in 2010, Mandiant was responding to APT1 at a bunch of different companies. And APT1 was, I think, PLA unit 61398, nailed it. Still remember the 5 digits. And I remember seeing indicators that we had known about for 18 months just starting to get into Symantec and McAfee's AV. So there's like an 18-month window from us seeing backdoors and badness to the AV companies going, hey, okay, let's get a signature for those things. That's a pretty big delta, 1.5 years of wide open malware being undetected. And then patches going unpatched for a while for months. We'd find a 0 day and work with vendors, and 3 months later, that would happen. We've compressed this cycle tremendously. And I do believe today, if Mandiant sees new and novel, we're sharing it with other vendors right away. We're doing shields up as fast as we can. We're sharing it with government entities across the globe. We're sharing it with partners across the globe, because the goal is, let's close the window. And we're doing that, no question about it. And there's really 3 other things that prove it. I think seeing 80 0 days in a year means it's getting harder to break in. It really is. And the good news, harder to break in. Bad news is back in around 2013 or 14, when we saw 0 day, it was started and conducted by a nation or a threat actor that we'd attribute to working for a nation. Now, about 40% of the 0 days we're responding to are first found and exploited by the criminal element, meaning there's enough money being made now that you can pay folks for a 0 day and then execute criminal intent. So that's suboptimal, yet we're closing the window fast enough that we're not seeing it. And then the other thing, kind of backpedaling to what's going on in the Ukraine, and we'll talk a little bit about that. When you have armed conflict, there's going to be a cyber component. And when you can see that armed conflict is inevitable, what I think we're learning in the Ukraine is when you prepare in cyberspace for an onslaught of attacks, you can do pretty well. You can recover quick enough to operate your businesses and do things. So there's no question, if all of us leave this conference in 3 days with, we can win with great defense, I think I've kind of turned from pessimist to optimist. I'm starting to think we're getting agile enough, the tech's getting better, our threat intelligence is being shared faster. We're going to continue to better all of these things. But if you can withstand Russian offense, you're doing really, really well. And there's a nation that's doing that. So those are the things we kind of saw. More of everything, yet we're closing the security gap. And I think because we're closing the security gap, we're starting to minimize the impact of the breaches. So let's look at the top security trends that I've witnessed talking to maybe 300 to 400 CISOs in the last year. By the way, there's a top 10. I can't go through all of them, but there's certain ones that we're seeing at 1A enterprises and kind of the next tier down. First, we'll start with resilience, and maybe it's because of ransomware, but almost every time we're speaking to boards and we're talking to CISOs, they are doing tabletop exercises to figure out, well, how would we respond to ransomware? And they simulate their business going down. And second, they really are trying to figure out, what are our assets that matter? Do we have those assets backed up? Are those backups secure? Can we recover those backups? Do the critical applications really work? And most organizations are at the stage where we've figured out our assets, we've got our backups, the backups are secure, but they have not done like the real dry run to make sure, okay, we can get up and running in 3 hours. But the goal of the resilience, whether it's a hurricane, earthquake, or ransomware, it's all the same, it's disaster recovery to some extent, is to be able to answer the question that the CEO or shareholders will have, which is simply, so how long before you're up and running? And not every company can answer that just yet, but I do believe go out a year or two, the vast majority of companies will be able to answer that question. Another thing that's common and top of mind, and I think we're at the tail end of this one, but we're still all working it, is understanding our supply chain risk. Whether it's vendors that we work with, vendors we supply, vendors we share data with, and everybody's going through that drill. We do it all the time at Mandiant, and all of you are doing it. You got to figure out who's on our vendor list. My answer to that, one time I went to all our business line owners, hey, who do we do business with? And you got to list like 12 companies. Then you go to our CFO, Frank, and say, hey, who do we do business with? And you get 2,800 companies. So you start with who are you paying, you get your laundry list, and then you prioritize that list on here's the vendors that we most depend on to supply our services and conduct our mission. And then you kind of work back to, and what's our relationship with those vendors? Do they have our data? Do we need to have SOC 2 audits of them? Do we need to send them a questionnaire? And probably a whole nother presentation is on supply chain risk management, but it's top of mind right now. Everybody's going through it. Everybody's going to the cloud faster, period. And so we'll have Phil Venables out here securing the Google Cloud. We'll talk about what people are doing there. I'm getting a lot of dialogue on identity. And we had to live through this as well. In November, December of 2020, we were compromised by the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service known as the SVR. And I remember going, my God, what are we going to do about identity? And it is a hard lift and shift to go from Active Directory the old way to taking your authoritative means of identity and access and putting a governance over that, of who can access what. And I think that's a very common shift that a lot of people are going through right now, where they're figuring out, okay, here's all the accounts we've got, who can access what. If you've got the right software, you start realizing, oh my God, look at the access bloat. Someone who's been here for 9 years can access everything. And then just to make it easy, the new person gets, hey, let's just give them the same access as the guy who's been here 9 years, and you see all this access bloat. So there's a lot of folks looking at not just how we do access management or how we do governance or how we do privileged account management. They're figuring out who has access to what and can we do just-in-time access. So all that stuff's going to change, and stay tuned for that. OT security obviously matters, and we'll move on that, and then zero trust. In addition to these trends, I just want to look out a few years, and just talk about some of the problems that we really are thinking about now. We may not have an answer just yet, but I do believe the future is predictable. If you go back 3 or 4 years, I feel like we're always saying the same things. Here's what's going to happen in cyberspace. And the first thing I had up there is the 3 rules of the playground will be broken. I don't know where I got this, but something that I was always looking for. And by the way, I used to have 5 rules of the playground, but in 2016, Russia broke 2 of them. So now we're down to 3 that I've yet to see, and they're demarcation lines for me personally that would show escalation in cyber should they occur. First is what I would call a great false flag operation, meaning have one threat actor do a perfect job of emulating a different person. And I think most modern nations that are practicing offense can emulate other threat groups. It's going to be a lot of work. You may have to have a special unit that's all they do. Their infrastructure and malware are identical to a perceived threat or adversary. But every false flag that I've seen inside baseball, we've kind of known, hey, that's not really them and it's not really those folks. And you're all thinking, well, how will you know when the first false flag op happens? We won't. I mean, that's the reality. If it's done perfectly well, we won't. But I don't think I've seen it come close enough to worry about it just yet. So I think it's a tool in many nations' arsenal, and they're all waiting to see who deploys that first. Second, I've never seen in my career, and others out there will be like, oh, Mandia just didn't see it. All of our frontline responders are looking for this. I've never seen pre-deployed industrial control system aware malware deployed in the United States. It's an escalation I've never seen. And I think that the day we wake up and see malware or industrial control system aware software that's bad, malicious intent on our networks, it will have already executed. So that to me is coming up a notch, because nobody knows how that escalates tensions between nations should you actually start attacking ICS. And I've never seen a modern nation, there's 1 or 2 exceptions of source code change. I've never seen a modern nation go in and change data to create a data integrity issue. So I also think that's a demarcation line where no modern nation, folks that are chartered to hack for espionage purposes and security reasons, those types of actors, in my opinion, have to think long and hard before they change data, because we'll all have to live with that escalation should that happen. All these other things you can predict. There's going to be attacks on the cloud because we're all going there. That's where the data is. That's where all the resources are. There's going to be more destructive attacks because that just follows conflict and ideological differences. We're going to deal with disinformation and influence ops, and we're going to deal with the metaverse, which I joined a few days ago, and I'm baffled by this. And I can't wait to the day our responders are flopping goggles on to figure out, all right, who stole the Gucci shoes that this avatar bought, but now this avatar is wearing them. I don't know if it goes there, but I think we should have stopped at Atari. There we go. This is a big topic, and I've thought a lot about this, and I don't know if there's ever going to be a clear-cut answer on how we handle disinformation, or really at the top, information operations. When you look at this stuff, this is all about trust. And I do believe it's human nature that you don't want to be lied to or deceived. Maybe some people, there's probably a percentage that like that. But it's a big issue for us. And you know, Mandiant's on the front lines, and Google and a lot of other organizations where we're trying to figure this out. You know, it's hard to know the difference between a lie, period, and someone who's just got a really bad opinion. And there's all these blurry lines. And what we're trying to figure out is, how do we manage this? What does the general citizen of different nations expect? Because I'm not even convinced you're going to get a baseline. There might be some nations like ours where you have freedom of the press, you have the First Amendment, and quite frankly, that protects citizens of the United States to have an opinion, voice their opinion. And that opinion may be really, really well aligned with the exact same opinion that Russian Foreign Intelligence Service is amplifying, okay? Then they get to do that. So there's going to be a lot of changes in this, but the reason I brought it up today is I think we are professionalizing this area in our schools, in different nations, because everybody's recognizing you got to know what to trust, you got to know what to believe, you have to make decisioning off of reality. And as we go into the metaverse and we go into deep fakes, fake video, fake audio, we're going to come up with tools that help the average citizen and lay people figure this out. And the ultimate backstop is, and teach critical thought. People need to think as they read things. But I just want you to know we're on a mission at Mandiant, at Google, and at other organizations to figure this out. To protect elections, to protect the hearts and minds of people from adversaries that are trying to influence it with artificial amplification that's just unhealthy. And we'll do better and better at this, but this, in my opinion, is a huge problem for this generation to solve, as we have technology racing ahead of really the physical world at this point. Left thumb's not working either. And I've talked about this every single year, because I remember about 3 years ago we did this conference. It was called something else then, and we talked about how diplomacy plus technology plus people is what will fix the cybersecurity challenges we all have. We're still under the same place. Like, it's so fascinating for me to observe rules of engagement that I believe aren't really documented in cyber. But what we're observing is nations doing things in cyber, and probably outside of cyber, that are doing everything they can to not create escalation, but still have some kind of deterring effect. But we have unclear doctrines. Different nations have unclear doctrines. Some nations have malware that when you reverse it, deletes your whole machine. Other nations don't do that. Some nations will change data, some won't. And it just goes down to the importance of all of us, as we respond and we defend the cyber domain, have to realize attribution does matter. It's the only way you will hold nations or people accountable. And without attribution, you can't proportionately respond. Without that, there is no deterrence. So this is a topic we talk about every year. You're going to hear other people talk about it, but we are getting better at this, in my opinion. As complex as it is, more folks are recognizing what actions are intolerable on the internet, more nations are cooperative, and we are getting better. That's simple. So we'll always be addressing that. And then there's been an evolution of board governance, and I usually get to go in and speak to boards after the disaster happens, so I get, pretty, they're willing to listen. But what we've seen, and I actually first heard Phil Venables talk about this a few months ago, boards exist for a lot of reasons, but one is for governance. They are responsible to look at our financials, understand them, and make sure we are governed by generally accepting principles. And fine. You're going to see the evolution where I believe the expectation of the board is to understand cyber risk as well. That there's not going to be the hall pass of, hey, cyber's too complex, too hard to manage, we can't figure it out. We're going through that evolution now, and I think we're going through it fast, and I think we're going to be successful in it, where boards and executives, operational management, really are going to understand the risk, quantify it better, and feel more comfortable discussing it. We've been a part of this. Most of us in this room have been a part of this transition, speaking to boards over the years. They totally get the threats now, but most importantly, they're running their whole darn business digitally now, in the cloud. And they recognize, wow, if we have a security incident, we don't have a business. We can't operate through it anymore. And we lived this firsthand on some of the ransomware that we responded to, where I remember the days where everybody did business with pen and paper. Now, if there's ransomware at a restaurant, they can't even take an order because half the folks that work there don't even know the menu, and the menu's connected to a back-end server, and they're like, well, it does no good to try to take your order now. And it's amazing. Our dependence is so high that every board's showing up. 5 years from now, I think every single board, there'll be a cyber risk component to it, and you're going to see a lot of dialogue that's understood by the board. Now I want to end with one thing that may not be top of mind for all of you, but at Mandiant, we've been trying to automate our security expertise since we started the company in 2004. We always had the model of, if we respond to every breach that matters, have a global threat intelligence arm that John Waters built at iSight to expand upon. We have a front row seat with the breaches, but we got to go beyond that and be in the groups where the threat actors are. And then at the same time frame, do a bunch of red teaming. We know a lot about the new and novel attacks. And that means we know how to find the needle in the haystack. We understand those fingerprints. How do we bring them to everybody really, really fast? Because it's complex to find them when you have all the security telemetry coming in. So we always had the vision, let's automate this. First time I had a briefing on automated SOC was in 2009. And we've been racing to build this ever since. We partnered with Google and Google Cloud because they had the same vision. And we thought to ourselves, who's great at analytics? Google. Who's great at search? Google. Who thinks they have the best AI on the planet? Google does. Let's combine our security expertise with their big data, their analytics, and their AI, and let's really get that automation going so that through software, you feel like thousands of experts have your back combating the offense.